And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Benched with Bubba, episode 95. Have a special guest on tap tonight to talk some fantasy baseball and dig into the, more in-depth StatCasty and new metrics that people are looking at on the baseball landscape these days. In order to do so, you can find him on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Toby, how we doing, man?
We're doing well, Bubba. Thanks so much for having me on the show, the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
It's going to be great. I can't wait to do it. I think we kind of got to know each other, right before the season or so. Your tweets are just awesome because they open up so many different parallels to things. I've told people for a while that I've slowly been like that, guy that lives under a rock that didn't want to accept the new era of stats. And the last year or so, I've really started to dig in, and I'm still learning them as I go because there's so many new ones that keep coming out. And you look at your tweets all the time, and it gives just great in-depth looks at, this is why player A is doing this, and maybe player A is going to start doing this, or so on and so forth. And I think it's a great tool, and you're using Twitter to its fullest ability in that sense. So kudos to you on that one. And
thanks, I appreciate that.
No, anytime.
I put a lot of time into those tweets, so I'm glad it's nice to hear that folks appreciate them.
No, and trust me, it's not just me. I'm just speaking. I'm hoping for many because I've heard your name mentioned on other shows about the stuff you're tweeting out. So it is not going unnoticed. If that's anything you need to know, it's definitely much appreciated because I'll look up these things and I know they're time consuming for you because I'll try to put little things together and then you or Matt Modica or somebody throws out these long tweets with all this info. I'm like, good Lord, that's amazing. So. Thank you for that. But let's get into some of the things. We'll start with kind of your process. We kind of talked about it in the DM for a little bit, but let's let the people know when you're looking at kind of the hitters and, what makes them the plus and minuses and the stats you're looking at. Kind of give us a little behind the scenes on what you do when you break those down.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like you mentioned before, there's so much data that's out there right now. And so I think half the battle is sifting through what you think might be useful and what might not be useful. So for me, I always start off at Fangraphs normally, and I'm looking at kind of the three primary things I look at initially are O swing or chase rate. So essentially the percentage of pitches that a batter swings outside the zone, contact and swinging strike percentage, mostly contact with hitters, just because swinging strike rate, the denominator is pitches, whereas contact is how many times somebody's swinging. So if somebody's not swinging at a lot of pitches, then their swinging strike rate is going to look low. Somebody like a Reese Hoskins, for instance. And then I also look at hard hit rate. I don't actually love hard hit rate as a stat, but I think it gives you a pretty good sense of how hard people are hitting the ball. And so those are kind of the three I start off with. So O swing with trace rate, the lower the O swing, essentially the better. That person is showing that they have a good eye, good plate discipline. It's correlated with walk percentage. There are some things that impact it, right? Like if you're making contact or you're aggressive in the zone, even having a lower O swing percentage might not result in a higher walk rate. But generally speaking, I think of that as kind of, what you look for plate discipline. With contact, it's contact. How often is somebody making contact? And then with hard hit rate, it's, how hard is somebody hitting the ball? The reason why I don't love hard hit rate is that it's somewhat subjective because it's not based on exit velocity on Fangraphs. I mean, I'm sure it does a great job of kind of calculating whether somebody's hitting the ball hard, but it's not tied directly to exit velocity. So, I think of that, I look at that one just to see how hard somebody's hitting the ball. And I like to think about the combination of these things too. So I love it when I see that a hitter is swinging at less pitches, making more contact and making hard contact, because that really tells me, something's changed in his approach. He's being more patient, looking for that pitch to hit and hit it. So those are kind of my three ones that I go to initially. And then always looking back at somebody's career. It's much easier to do this when somebody has a career you can look at and really looking at, okay, if his O swing percentage is down, he's swinging at less pitches outside the zone, but his walk rate, is the same or is worse, that might be a situation where you can expect the walk rate to increase as long as those skills increase. So I'm really looking at skills here as opposed to stats. So those are kind of the primary three. I could talk for days, so I apologize in advance for this, but about these. And then I always go to xstats.org, which is this great website that Andrew Perpetua writes for Rotographs and Fangraphs put together. And essentially it looks at every batted ball based on both exit velocity and then horizontal and vertical launch angle. That's where it's different from some of the expected metrics that you see on like Baseball Savant. And then it calculates a hit percentage as well as, you know, what type of hit it would expect that to be. And based on that, he's able to put together like expected average, expected home runs. And so that really gives me a sense of whether what we're seeing in terms of performance is accurate, you know. And for the most part, it does a great job of doing that. But, you know, there are certain situations like really fast runners that bunt a lot. It's not good at factoring folks like that. So you have to think about, you know, putting together both the skills that you look at and the expected stats. And then let me know if you have any questions as I go through this.
Yeah, one thing I do want to ask you is because these are all different stats of different metrics and samples and everything. And what I'm wondering is, what kind of sample size are you looking for? What part of the season before you start letting these stats kind of sink in? Okay, this is something we can go off of. Because that's always kind of a hot button topic, depending on which person you're talking about, of what is the right sample size for these stats.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why I like to look at skills, I mean, there are certain skills that that are more reliable over smaller sample sizes. I'm not like a statistician at all, so I apologize if I'm using the wrong words to describe these things. But
you're using the better words than me, so you won't fool me. So you're fine.
Sweet. You know, I really look from the get-go, right? And I think with sample size, for me, it's a matter of like, how sure am I that this is going to continue? Because when you look at some of this stuff, right, you can have these huge fluctuations, right? You had, Paul DeYoung is a great example. I know we're going to talk about his injury later, but like he started out and his strikeout rate was like 40%. But when you looked at the underlying skills, you know, the skills were kind of showing you that not only was this guy, you know, kind of making similar contact was down slightly, but he was actually, his O swing percentage was down, but his walk rate hadn't gone up yet. So like you can look at things early on just to see and to gauge, like, does what he's doing right now, is it supported by the skills as opposed to the stats, right? Like it's kind of embarrassing, but oftentimes like I won't know how many runs or RBIs, you know, guys who aren't on my teams have, or home runs, because I'm really like looking at the skills first as opposed to, you know, the stats to see like, you know, is the approach good? Are they hitting the ball well? How do they compare to the major league average? And so really for me, like the skills, you know, is something that I'm tracking from the get-go. And then I'll just kind of put little, you know, like I'll tweet it out, or I'll just say, hey, you know, this guy's skills look a little interesting, right? That doesn't mean that they're going to continue, right? Because even when you know, whether something's predictive, not like, it's really hard to find predictive stats. And so like a lot of times what I'm looking for is there a change in the way that the batter is approaching hitting that supports the performance so far, whether it's good or bad? So sample size is obviously something like, don't make big decisions based on small sample sizes, but it's also like, we talked about this before the show started, like people like now in fantasy, like you can get information so much, like there's so much information out there that you can't wait until something's meaningful statistically,
Exactly,
you know, to like pounce on it. So that's why I like to look at skills, because it really tells me like, if so-and-so, like if Corey Dickerson has like a 9% K percentage, right? And yeah, he's improved contact, but like his contact or swinging strike rate looks more like a 20% K rate. Like I'm not going to think that that's going to hold necessarily. You know, if his swinging strike rate's down at like 3%, you know, that might be something where I'm like, oh, okay, like I think that might make more sense. So I'm always looking at it, and you just have to be conscious of that samples can change so quickly. Like look at Didi Gregorius, you know, like he had this amazing, you know, first couple weeks of the season, and it looked like his skills were off the charts, and then, you know, he's reverting back to a similar player to what he was before. So that's kind of the way that I think about these things, and why I love skills, looking at skills so much, is that you know, they kind of help you, give you a picture of, you know, who is this guy, like what are they doing, and is it different from what they've done before?
No, that makes a ton of sense, and that's why I was kind of asking, because it is in this world we live in now where you have to make decisions so fast. You see everybody looking at their fab budgets this week to go pick up minor leaguers that haven't done anything in the bigs, and
Really.
we'll talk about we'll talk about Soto and others, and you look at them and you realize the guy is great, but he's only done this at the Double A level for a couple of weeks and against different talent levels and so on and so forth. And it's okay for some people, I guess, in that extent, to take that small sample as being great. But then you go and you mention it to a guy that's done it in the league for 10 years or something like that, and all of a sudden, no, that's not a big enough sample to say the change is legit type thing. So I guess it's to each their own, but it's really interesting with the data you put out there, because you mentioned when you post a tweet or something, it's not to say, hey, this guy's great, he's going to keep doing this. It can also be showing you, hey, this is what he usually does, and this is what he's doing now. There's a good chance it comes back down to earth. So let's look at both sides of the story here and figure it out.
Yeah. And that's one hard thing about the tweets is I want to fit everything in those 280 characters. Thank God for 280 characters. I might be the first person to ever say that about Twitter, but what information do you provide? And a lot of times I feel bad because I'll put stuff out there without necessarily having a description of what this means action wise. And people will be like, so what are you trying to tell me? And then I get to explain it a little bit more, but you're absolutely right. And extreme samples are something too. I think it was Bill James who talked about extreme samples. There's something there's things that are meaningful in extreme samples, right? It tells you something. Just if somebody hits one of the hardest balls exit velocity wise, he may not hit a ton of those, but that actually tells you something about. That's a skill, right? Not everybody can hit the ball as hard as Aaron Judge can. So
exactly. No, that's some of the crazy stuff about it, and it's going to keep evolving to make it fun. But that's for people to decipher and have good conversations about. As long as the Twitter cesspool doesn't go out of control on it, then these can be great building blocks. But as you know, and many others do, that doesn't always seem to be the case on Twitter. So we shall see how that keeps going. Let's talk about some pitcher stuff. We got the hitters down. What are you looking for pitchers wise? By what I'm seeing here is pretty similar type stuff, but tell the listeners what you got going there.
Yeah, definitely. So with pitchers, it is similar stuff. I look at swinging strike rate. Swinging strike rate correlates better to strikeout rate than contact rate among pitchers, I believe. But it's a great indicator of strikeout potential. That's kind of my go-to stat, if you will, just because I'm looking at it's much better not to let people put the ball in play, right? You get into trouble when you have balls in play. So looking at what strikeout potential is, and especially in today's fantasy game, I mean, it used to be that if you had 9K, if you were in an innings limit league and you had 9 Ks per 9, right? That was amazing, right? And now it's fairly regular to see pitchers with who are striking out more than one person an inning, and so. When you get into 7 Ks per 9 or 6 Ks per 9, that's really going to drag you down, in every league, but especially if you have a innings limit at all. So I look at swinging strike rate, contact rate. In contact rate, I look at in zone contact rate more than outside the zone. So Z contact, just because that tells me even when the hitter's getting a ball in the zone, how well are they doing against this guy's stuff? I look at K- walk percentage. I mean, that's probably the best indicator of how good a pitcher is, because it looks at both strikeouts and control. And then I look at O swing too, because O swing, somebody with a high O swing, that helps limit their walk rate, because when they're throwing it outside the zone, people are swinging at it. And it also means that they can, they can get away with a little worse control. And then when I look at looking at somebody's control, I look at first pick strike rate, seeing where they are, and then zone percentage to see whether somebody's, there's a lot of guys Jamison Tyone is kind of the guy that I go to as a perfect example, right? He came out of the gate super hot, but when you looked at his swinging strike rate, it was the same as always, right? And it's well below average. So his K rate was higher, but you knew that was coming down. And similarly, his walk percentage was about the same as normal, but his first pitch strike percentage was mid 50s or something like that. And his zone percentage was pretty similar. So he was getting behind people in the zone. So that was kind of a red flag for me. So looking at that, and I think the challenge with this is that and Eno Saris just had an article where he had I think it's the command plus stat. And there are different stats out there for command. but that's something that's really hard, right? You're really looking at strikeouts and control. It's really hard to get a gauge on command, but it's good to see that there are more stats out there that are coming out to look at that. And then I also use X stats for pitchers, right? Especially looking at like, their BABIP, versus their expected BABIP, their a WOBA versus their expected WOBA, kind of like for a little bit more of a comprehensive look to see, who's overperforming or underperforming their batted balls in play. And then when I get super detailed, I like to look at pitch splits. So if you go into Fangraphs and you go into splits, and then another tab there is pitch splits, you can actually look at how each pitch does. And so I like to look at comparing past seasons, like how is this pitch doing? What percentage of the time are they throwing this pitch? Because sometimes it can be as simple as like, just increasing throwing your best pitch. It sounds ridiculous. Like it sounds like people would know to do that, but I'm sure it's much more complicated than that. But sometimes just throwing like your best pitch and a pitch with the highest swinging strike rate is going to help get you more Ks. And then also, I do this for hitters too. I like to look at average rolling graphs through Fangraphs. So like looking at these metrics over time. So like, what is the 80 game rolling average? What is the 40 game rolling average? What is the 20 game rolling average? Just to see like whether there's any trends that you can identify in what's happening with what they're doing. A good example would be like Matt Davidson. Like when he hit the 3 home runs to start the season, I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I went into his rolling averages graph, and it actually was pretty clear that at the end of last season, he had really limited his swings on pitches outside the zone and had developed a much better eye. So I didn't know what he was going to do moving forward, but it was kind of like, this is interesting. Like it seems like he has a different approach at the plate. Like he hits the ball really hard. It'll be interesting to see what happens from there. So that's where those come into play. And, at Fangraphs, you can see, contact percentage, swinging strike percentage. You can see pitch mix. So like, how is that fluctuating? And then looking how that impacts like swinging strike and stuff like that. Like, is there a spike in Kyle Gibson's slider usage that is accompanying a spike in overall swinging strike rate? So that's kind of what, I do for pitching, as well. And again, like this is pretty laborious and it takes time to get used to. So, choose what works for you and kind of go from there.
No, I like it. And you mentioned, the strikeout information out, the swing, the zone rates and all that stuff. And it is a different era we're watching in baseball now with the 3 true outcomes, and one of them striking out quite a bit. There's guys with, 30+% K rates. I think Max Scherzer, he still is, or he's close to almost 50% K rate on right-handed batters. Like there's just ridiculous numbers now that you didn't see back in the day. So it is interesting to look at the different, zone percentages and whatnot when it comes to the pitching. When you're doing these samples for your hitting and your pitching, before we get into the next topic on the pickups, which set of kind of, trending stats do you see staying truer? Is it the hitters kind of stay truer to their improvement or unimproved stats, or the pitchers kind of show more of a consistency with the improvements or not improved stats?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Just a rough number. We don't need exact. Like if you just think about, I know you've put out hundreds of them, so it might be hard just to think about, but if you had to just take a guess, then I guess.
Yeah. Sometimes I want to just like go back and look at every tweet I've put out and like analyze like, okay, did this end up happening or not? But it's like what I think is important is like, I don't know if this makes sense, but like what I try to do is I try to create a narrative for the player. Like, does this make sense? Right. Like, so let's say like, a guy, like you see that his, that he's, that their swinging strike rate is increasing, right? A lot, but the K percentage is not increasing, right? Like a hitter is, the skills are saying that something is supposed to happen and it's not happening. Like the reason why I love O-swing for hitters is because not only does it tell you like about walks, but like it really says like this person's locked in. Like this person knows the zone. Like they're swinging at better pitches. And so like if I
very underrated these days. Very underrated these days.
Yeah, totally. Well, like guys that are hard for me are like Javier Baez, right? For the season, I was like, I can't believe people are like, paying, ADP of 105 for Javi Baez, right? Like, this is ridiculous. Look at his swinging strike rate is worse than Joey Votto's over the last, however long. Like, there's no way this guy is going to be good. And look what he goes and does, like, at the beginning of the season. And I'm sitting here like, oh, well, I missed that one. I said the same thing about Didi Gregorius about home runs, right? Like, he's always way over expected home runs. Like, he always, like, last year he had 25. I think he was at 15 expected home runs. His average home run distance was like 337 feet, right? Like 25 home runs at 337 feet. Like, how do you do that?
Stadium.
He hits 10 home runs. So, like, there are guys that are going to break it, but a lot of times, like, it's looking for that story. Like, do the pieces connect? Like, they're starting to hit the ball harder. Are they swinging at better pitches? Is the contact going up? Does that make sense? Like, a good example is home runs. Like, home runs, I think there's so many stats now that you can look at to say, like, does this make sense, right? So for like power metrics, like if a guy's hitting a ton of home runs, I'll look at the home runs and then I'll look at expected home runs, right? So like on similar batted balls with the same exit velocity, horizontal and vertical launch angle, are these folks, does the home runs make sense, right? And some people always outperform their expected home runs. And I'm sure there's a reason why that we just don't know, but it just happens. So there's that, right? You can also look at hard hit fly ball rate. You can look at fly ball rate. Like, if your hard hit fly ball rate is staying the same, but you're hitting more fly balls, you should hit more home runs, right? Because the volume is going to be higher. Hard hit pulled fly ball rate, like, that's one of the things that hitters can do that's easiest is if you pull the ball more in the air, you're going to hit more home runs because you don't have to hit the ball as far, right? So I look at hard hit pulled fly ball percentage, which is something you can do in the split tools and Fangraphs. I look at barrels per plate appearance because that's your quality contact, right? Is this person making really good contact? And then I look at exit velocity at certain launch angles, right? Like, a lot of times people will use average launch angle, and I very rarely use that, and I try to stay away from it because, like, really, like, I don't care how hard Eric Hosmer is hitting the ball at a negative 30-degree launch angle, right? Like, that doesn't matter to me, right? If he's hitting the ball 105 miles per hour, which he's not, like, on like fly ball launch angles, like, a lot of those are going to be home runs. So looking at exit velocity at certain launch angles, like 17 degrees to 42 or 19 to 39, depending, so there's all those things that you can look at. Those are things with power numbers where I feel pretty comfortable saying, like, this is just small sample size. It's not going to work out, or, otherwise. But there's always exceptions to the rule. Like, Joe Mauer always underperforms his expected home runs by a ton. And that's because he hits a lot of them to the opposite field. And I wonder if there's something like spin rate wise on the ball, on when you hit the ball to the opposite field, that is somehow like limiting the distance or something. I don't know. But like, there's so many different ways to go at it. And, sometimes you're going to be right and sometimes you're going to be wrong. But I think when you look at the skills instead of the stats, I think more often than not, those are going to point you in the right direction.
No, I completely agree. That's kind of where I go back to when I used to just be more of I watch what's going on. I see what's happening. I believe what I'm watching on the field. But then now that we have all these great stats that kind of portray that idea, that logic, like you're talking about with the pulled percentages and other things like that you can actually put, pen to paper and analyze a lot more than just saying, hey, this guy's crushing a lot of balls to right field. It's a lot different. So a little justification goes a long ways. Kind of last question on this topic here. What when you're looking at your hitters and your pitchers and all these different changes and so on and so forth, everything we just talked about, what do you have to see to make you start pulling the triggers on ad drops in your fantasy leagues?
Yeah. Well, I think, what we talked about earlier is so fitting, right? Is oftentimes you don't
have the time.
You don't have that time to like make the decision. And so what I'm really looking for is do the skills support the improvement, right? So like somebody like a, and even that, like it's not, it doesn't always, work out, but like a good example would be like Daniel Robertson on the Rays, right? Like he's somebody who, I took a look at his skills, a couple weeks back, and I don't think he's actually had a very good couple weeks. He did hit a grand slammer yesterday, which is great, but he's a guy who's been dropped by a lot of people. But when you look at kind of like the skills early on in the season, I mean, he was swinging at nothing outside the zone. His hard contact was up. you know, he was just making really good contact, and the expected stats were supporting, you know, the production, right? I think he was hitting a little above, you know, what his average should be, but his average was still like 320, right? Like that's a guy that I'm like, you know, oh, like the skills are supporting what I'm seeing, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to do well, you know, the rest of the season, but at least makes me feel a little bit more confident, especially when I can, like, what I like to do too is like look at the rolling graphs, and at that moment where you see them starting to shift, you know, I like to look at like, okay, what are their stats over that period of time, you know, and like really looking at, okay, like how has this changed this person as a hitter potentially? And I also like to look back at like the last 14 days, the last 30 days on a frequent basis, because a lot of times within the context of a season, as it gets longer, like if you just look at the season long stats, you're going to miss out on guys that are starting to hit the ball really well. Like I think it's John Hicks on Detroit. Detroit has like a really good schedule this next week. You know, Hicks, he's hitting a ton of fly balls. His hard hit rate has spiked. His O swing is getting a little bit better. You know, his contact rate is still pretty crappy, but like that's a guy if you're looking for home runs, right? Where if you look at the overall season, it doesn't look too nice, but recently it's really, you know, taken a turn for the better. Andrew McCutchen, I know we're going to talk about him later, I think a little bit, but you know, if you look at his recent skills, I mean, they are nuts. I mean, like he's swinging at his O swing percentage is 15%, so half of what the league average is. His hard hit rate is up at 50%. You know, his barrels per plate appearance is up 3% over last year. His hard hit rate is up 10% about over last year. He has 3 home runs, 5.3 expected home runs. Like we saw what he could do over a month period of time last year with the Pirates around this time. So that's a guy that I'm maybe targeting in a trade or something like that. So it really is about like looking at how the skills change and whether there's stats that support that, or in a lot of cases, like the stats don't support that yet, but like the skills show you that this is a really good player over the last little bit. And if they can continue this moving forward, you know, that they can really improve, right? Like that's why, you know, guys like Tommy Pham, like love Tommy Pham heading into this year because God, he didn't swing at any bad pitches. He hit the ball hard. Yeah, he hit a bunch of ground balls, but when he hit the ball in the air, he hit it really hard, right? Like same thing with Jose Martinez, right? Like he, you know, if you looked at the whole season, he was nowhere within the leaders, but when you looked at his stats and his X stats and his skills, right, they all said 300 hitter, doesn't hit a lot of fly balls, but when he hits fly balls, he hits those things hard. So, you know, those are examples of where you can use those smaller sample sizes to really make decisions. And I think, especially on trades, like if a guy is like, if the skills are saying this guy is going to break out, you know, then, you know, go for him. Like Alex Bregman, I put up a tweet, like I love Alex Bregman because those skills are so good, you know? So he's a guy like that I would be targeting in trades because I think he's going to go off the hook, right? He just had a home run stolen the other day. He just hit a home run recently. Like I think he's going to go off sometime soon. That whole Houston lineup is just waiting to explode, I think.
Well, yeah, and you know, the generic way to say it is what I like to say a lot is, you know, after a while, baseball's such a great game, and there's such a history, and you know, so much of a sample of year after year after year. You get the back of the baseball card comes into play. So they look at Didi Gregorius, and he comes off to that hot start, and he's still having a great year when you look at the stats, but regression was coming. You talk about Alex Bregman. Yes, he's off to a slow start, but you just said it. His tools, his advanced stats, everything you look at are just outstanding, and now he's starting to heat up. So he's going to get to those numbers by season's end. So looking at those advanced stats and the X stats, everything you're talking about is great. You know, maybe in a couple episodes from now, I'm going to have to bring up an X stat statement because I didn't even look at him until you mentioned him. But there's a lot of like, you know, X WOBAs and what the actual WOBA is and stuff like that, where you can really you kind of pick apart what's going right, what's going wrong, who should be improving. So definitely some really good stuff to look into and more. I know as the data keeps getting better and better with this year's sample size, you've been using a couple different tools and tweeting out different stats. So it should be really cool to see where that keeps going and seeing which players, you know, the X stats start to show the truth type thing. So it'll be a lot of fun there.
Totally.
Let's talk some StatCast. We do have, you know, StatCast leaderboards came out, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was, and now we're starting to get a little more fine tuning. Real quick, you have some 0 to 42, 17 to 42 degree guys, and then you're 17 to 42 with plus 95 miles per hour, more of a launch or a barrel type hitter, and then 100 miles an hour plus. give a quick breakdown there. And I want to ask you a couple questions on some players on exit velocity, kind of average exit velocity to start the year.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, like a lot of times some of the tweets that I put out are, what I'll do is look at like balls in play, right? Like we have a sense of what the best balls in play are, right? Like if you want to have a high average, like hitting the ball, 10 degrees to 26-ish degrees is like a great way to go, because you're hitting line drives that are over the infield, falling in front of the outfielders, or if you're hitting them hard, that are going through the gaps, or, can be home runs even at the higher end of that echelon. So we kind of know what the, what the good degrees are. Like some of this is, I haven't actually done the analysis to know exactly like what, like what the, the launch angle breakdown should be. But like, when you're hitting the ball, what I'll look at is like, what is the league average on these balls in play, right? Like, so for instance, if you hit the ball over 100 miles per hour, anywhere above 0 degrees, right? Like the major league batting average is 708 and the slugging is 1590, right? So like on average, you are getting a base hit in between a single and a double. And a lot of times it's a lot more than that, right? So like those are quality hits. I just saw like Josh Bell hit one like 52 degrees that was over 100 miles per hour. And I was like, wow, that's fairly impressive. So I might have to bring it down to like 42 degrees or something like that. But these are like really, really solid contact. And so you look at the leaderboard for that. Top 10 right now is JD Martinez, Jose Abreu, Mookie Betts, Manny Machado, Mike Moustakas, Chris Davis, Justin Upton, Freddie Freeman, Mitch Haniger, Mike Trout. So like you look in the names that are on that search, that like these are guys that are really, really good. But what I like to look for is like, who are guys who are kind of like
exactly
out there that you wouldn't necessarily think about. So like for me, like Jose Martinez is number 15. And this is actually not exit velocity, but this is the number of times they've hit a ball like this. Jose Martinez is number 15, right? Like that's really good. Teoscar Hernandez, like he has been one of the unluckier hitters. He is actually crushing the ball. Like he has the highest average exit velocity between 17 and 42 degrees. I think it's like 101 miles per hour of anybody, right? Bigger than Judge, bigger than Stanton. And yet I think he has like 6 home runs right now, but his expected home runs is like closer to 10, right? So like guys like that, where I'm like, that he's hitting it a lot. And then you can also look by percentage of pitches. So like one of the things that I would love it if Baseball Savant did a per plate appearance. And it sounds like they're going to actually ask that question, but like percent pitches really doesn't help that much. But you can also look at by percentage of pitches to see if there are guys with smaller samples who are hitting it well. Like you can see a guy like that, like Trey Mancini is a guy who's hitting the ball really hard. He's had some regression in contact, but he's making good contact. Ryan Zimmerman's up there despite being injured. He's a guy where it looks very similar, everything that he's been doing except for the results. Matt Olson is up there again. So just looking through those kind of lists to see who are some of the guys that might be surprising and jump out at you. Brian Anderson of the Marlins, right? He's got 29 of them. And over the last few weeks, he's actually one of the leaders. And so that would be a thing where I might look, for over the last month, who's been the leader, right? Random endpoints, but just seeing like how those things are going. That's one I like a lot, like the 17 to 40 degrees and 95 plus miles per hour. That's like a lot of home runs and extra base hits. Again, like a lot of folks that you would normally see in there, with a little bit of Jason Kipnis added in, who's been, challenging to figure out. So those are just kind of the things that I like to look at. Average exit velocity between 0 and 42 degrees. Average exit velocity can tell you a lot of things, but it can also be really misleading, right? Like if you're hitting a lot of 100 mile per hour, -10 degree balls, like you're hitting the ball hard, and a lot of those are probably going to be singles, but chances are you're not going to be hitting home runs on those, right? Whereas if you hit the ball 100 miles per hour at 26 degrees, like, bingo, right? Like start rounding the bases. So, that I think is how I like to use StatCast, is like really looking at the launch angle and the exit velocity there. And again, like I apologize. I warned you beforehand that like I would talk for days on this stuff. So
you're fine.
Me if you so choose.
You're fine. I didn't go super in depth. I just on the leaderboard I pulled up. I said the players up there. I kind of put it within 50 minimum batted ball events. Didn't go super in depth, like I said, but I'm just looking at some key stats, like just average exit velocity in general in that time period. If it gives me the right one, there we go. You got your usual suspects like you'd expect: Aaron Judge, JD Martinez, so on and so forth. A guy that's been injured for a while, but before he got hurt, Ryan Zimmerman was still hitting the ball very, very hard. So that's why these leaderboards are interesting to me to look at. You go down a little farther, a catcher that's caught fire the last couple of weeks, Jorge Alfaro. There's another guy to look at, Kendrys Morales, and so on and so forth.
It's a small sample, but I was looking at him yesterday, and over the last 10 games, his O swing percentage and his contact have improved. They're still crappy, right? He's still probably got the worst plate discipline or contact skills in the league, but he's actually starting to improve. He'd be a guy that I would monitor. That's a great call.
Yeah, that's why I like looking at these, and then these catch your eyes, or the X stats like you were talking about catch your eyes, and you look at these, you can kind of put things together. And yes, it's time consuming. It definitely is, but you start seeing little things because I'm a Giants homer, and I admit it, and I try to keep it out of most of my analysis the best I can.
I grew up in Davis, California, so I grew up watching the Giants. So
we're gonna have to talk after the show because I'm born and raised in Woodland, California.
Oh,
so
really? Yeah, I had no idea. I'm gonna have to end this.
I can't believe you just said that. I went to school at UC Davis, and I grew up in Woodland. So
totally, yeah, we've got to chat about that because you guys have Dustin Pedroia and we don't.
Yes, we do have Dustin.
I was in Boston when he first came up. I tracked him super closely. That's awesome.
I grew up playing with Pedroia. We were on all-star teams together. I was his first baseman. Man. So yeah,
that team, there was one other guy that got drafted in the first round, right?
It was a couple years before that. Tony Torquato.
Yeah, by the Giants, right?
Yes, and he had a lot of power, just couldn't find a spot to play, and it all went. He's been playing. He went and played in Europe for a while.
Okay,
but cool. Not quite the Pedroia track.
Yeah.
But we'll definitely talk about that. But what I was going to is, number of barrels in the 50-game sample size, or at least for the season. Brandon Belt's fourth on that list, and it goes to show you. I've been preaching from the rooftops that this guy is a really good hitter. He gets AT&T'd to death, and he's always hurt. But he is one of the best examples of looking at the advanced stats you talk about. He screams a very, very good baseball hitter. So you mentioned Teoscar
Stadium.
Oh, it'd be killer. Absolutely killer.
That'd be like trade for Brandon Belt.
Yep.
He's got incredible plate discipline, hits the ball really hard, hits a ton of fly balls and line drives. Like his ground ball percentage is really low. Like everything that you could want in a hitter he's got, except where he hits it happens to be like brutal.
Exactly. He goes triple alley all day long. Yeah. But you mentioned Teoscar Hernandez. That's a guy that gets me literally. It's gone down after his red hot start, but still, he almost barrels the ball 15% of his plate appearances, which is one of the best in baseball. So he's a freak. And then, like you said, we could talk for hours on the different, like Trey Mancini's there. That's a good one. Yonder Alonso, so on and so forth. But a lot of the names you'd expect. But if you kind of dig in and change your search topics, that's kind of what we're trying to talk about in this episode, instead of just like, hey, here's a list of players, go get them. We're trying to get the advanced analytics, angles, stats, all that good stuff to look at. Let's talk about some pitchers, the soft contact variety, because this is one of those, is I'm like kind of what you were saying earlier. You're looking at, strikeouts, and that's the way of the world, and looking at your pitchers. And I agree. I'm 100%, K per nine. You got to go deeper than that now, like you said. Like I want a guy with at least 10 or 11 now instead of the normal 9. So on and so forth. But soft contact is very, very big in this era in baseball when everyone's trying to go deep. So what are some of the things you caught when you're looking at some of the soft contact pitchers?
Yeah, and I mean, I think quality of contact is one of these like super hard things to gauge, I really think. Some of the things that I look at, like I put out some tweets, dribbler percentage. And that's essentially like what I love about X-Stats is Andrew Perpetua has essentially created these buckets based on the outcomes of batted balls. Dribbler percentage, it's not connected necessarily to, it's a combination of exit velocities and launch angles that results in really poorly hit ground balls. So instead of just like, and I think that's the thing that I would say about like people who are hesitant about launch angle is that launch angle is just a more precise version of ground ball, line drive, fly ball. Like instead of categorizing all of these batted balls into 3 categories, you're putting them into much smaller categories. And that's what Andrew does. So like leaders on dribblers percentage, right? And I think these lists are so funny because they're interspersed with like really good guys and guys who are struggling. So like Charlie Morton is number 1 in the league in dribbler percentage, around 35%, I think. Jake Arrieta is doing that. Brandon McCarthy is also there, right? McCullers is there. Ty Block, Sean Newcomb, Jamison Tyone, Garrett Richards. Those are kind of some of the leaders in those categories. And as you go through, like some of it makes sense, right? It's like Charlie Morton, like he's amazing, right? Arrieta has been throwing his sinker a ton more since the middle of last year. He's inducing a ton of ground balls, which is fine, right? His Ks per 9 has fallen through the cracks or fallen through the roof. But he's inducing a lot of poor ground balls. Brandon McCarthy is too, but that kind of leads you to believe that he's probably giving up some good contact elsewhere. McCullers is there, but Ty Block too. He gives up a lot of contact overall, a lot of ground balls. So some of those are bad. Same thing with Tyone. Newcomb is super interesting. I put out a tweet about him like a few weeks ago, but he's actually a guy who all the metrics are pointing towards better control, at least. And that hitters are having a really hard time making solid contact on him. And so like he also shows up among the leaders in limiting hard contact, which I actually think is better than just looking at soft contact, is like who's limiting really good contact. And he shows up on that list. So he's a guy I love. So there's a guy like that. I look at pop-ups. So Verlander leads the league. 34.8% of his hits are pop-up, which are like infield fly balls that pretty much have like a 0% hit rate. Matt Boyd, as another surprise guy, he's in both the pop-ups and he's in limiting hard drives, which are kind of the best form of contact. Odorizzi's there, Caleb Smith. But you get like Marco Estrada, Fires, Velasquez is there. And I think one of the things with pop-up percentage is these are guys who are giving up a lot of fly balls. So some of those may end up being pop-ups, but some of those are ending up being hard drives and hard fly balls that end up doing damage. So that's a couple that I look at. Limiting hard drive percentage on XStats. This is like, I looked at this actually because you asked, and listen to this list. DeGrom, Nola, Syndergaard, Alex Wood, Matt Boyd, Morton, Luke Weaver, Newcomb, Ty Anderson, which I was really surprised about, to be honest with you, especially after today's start. That's a list of like some of the best pitchers that are right there. And then I also look at average exit velocity combined with kind of barrel percentage. So if you just go to the StatCast leaderboard, search by average exit velocity for pitchers, look at low percentages, but then look at, there's some guys who are limiting exit velocity but have a lot of barrels. So they're giving up a lot of like poor ground balls, but they're also getting hit hard. So I look at kind of the combination of those characteristics on batted ball quality. And then a way to summarize that often is just looking at their expected on xOBA on XStats or their WOBA, that kind of summarizes all of the batted ball / walks, Ks into one number that I like to look at.
I like that a lot. And you mentioned on that list with DeGrom and Nola on that lowest hard drive percentage. You got guys like Boyd, who said kind of surprise guy. He's a mystery. I think I've talked about him 3 or 4 times already this season on my podcast. And it's just like, you keep thinking, okay, well, the Matt Boyd's going to show up. And then he starts to have a start where, part of it was bad, but the rest was good. And then you look at the final stat line, and in the era, if you believe in quality starts, he had a quality start, and he had a lot of strikeouts, and he just keeps getting it done more often than not. Yeah. And that's why I like these. You mentioned guys like Estrada and another, but on that same leaderboard, Luke Weaver is a guy that's been polarizing to many. They can't figure out where last season went. But obviously, we look at these kind of stats, they're better. His last couple starts have been much better. Newcomb's just a freak this season, and so on and so forth. So I definitely like looking at stuff like that. It definitely opens your eyes to what you're looking at. Yeah. Let me talk about some hard. We'll do the hard percentage guys, lower hard percentage guys, instead of just soft contact in general. You got DeGrom and Nola and Verlander, so on. But the leader on Fangraphs right now, 21.5% hard contact rate, and this guy is tilting to me to no end, is Jake Arrieta. Do you have any just quick thoughts on Jake Arrieta for the season? Because I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I'm trying the search to see who's got the lowest. The thing with Arrieta is that this actually started in the middle of last year. June, he was giving up a ton of home runs. and he was really struggling, and he went hard. It's like the worst baseball. Like there's been some articles out recently, and you'll see people talking about him, like about how terrible the sinker is. Like a few sinkers, I feel like, at least for fantasy baseball purposes, because the swinging strike rate on that pitch is terrible. And so, like, do not expect Jarek Arrieta to somehow, unless he changes his pitch mix, to improve. I think this is where velocity can be like a little misleading. Misleading is right, but like, you know, a guy like him, he's giving up a ton of ground balls, right? 57.1%. The thing about ground balls is, you know, they're not going to be home runs, but they also produce fairly high BABIPs, right? Like fly ball pitchers tend to have fly balls are lower BABIP as long as they're not like really hard hit fly balls, right? You know, so they're pretty good at giving up damage, but you can be BABIP. Like this is like Jameson Tyone to the T, right? He doesn't have a strikeout pitch. So, you know, people are hitting a lot of balls on the ground. A lot of that is weak contact, but some of it is also hard contact on the ground, right? And so what I might actually, let's do this. I'm going to look at Jake Arrieta's, one of the things you can do within Fangraph is you can use the split tool within a player page to actually see how a player is doing on different types of batted balls. So like he's giving up a lot of dribbler, like a high dribbler percentage. You know, like a guy like him, he's going to have times where he like the balls get picked up by fielders and then times that they don't. And so I think he'll actually end up having decent ratios because he's not walking a ton of guys. But let's see, like if you look at his ground balls this year, so his ground balls, so only 17.1% hard, 63.2% medium, 19.7% soft. So of his the ground balls that he's given up. So he's not giving up a ton of hard ground balls, but he's actually giving up the lowest soft ground ball percentage of his career right now, you know, which to me would say, okay, like probably his BABIP on ground balls should be a little bit higher than average. And, you know, look at that. It's 197 right now. You know, it was 177 last year, 118 the year before, 173. So it makes sense that he would have like a little bit of you know, a little bit of a worse ground ball profile than maybe last year, this year. So that's just like, yeah, I would stay away from him because I just think like the 6 Ks per 9 is going to hurt you one way or the other. Like you can handle the ratios if you have a ton of Ks on your team, but he's a guy, you know, maybe he goes on a hot streak. I'd look to get rid of him. Maybe go for a guy who has a little bit higher K upside.
Yeah, no, he's ultra tilting to me. Too much contact. He's getting ground balls, but eventually I just don't see that working out too well. But you never know. He's a veteran. But a couple other names, we don't have to break them down. I just want to let people know is Kyle Freeland is one that keeps standing out on these type of leaderboards. At least get you to dig in more. Luke Weaver, we've talked about him on a couple of them already. And there's other ones that, like, you know, some people aren't sold on Dallas Keuchel still being good. Well, he's right now 14th on this list, which is pretty darn good. And he's still getting stuff done. It's just not flashy, and it doesn't help that he's in a rotation with so many other monsters. So he gets kind of overshadowed there. Let's go little player news here, and then wrap this up. Let's start with one that he's been ultra tilting. He is the definition of a home road split at the moment. Hasn't shown that in his career by any means, and everyone's screaming humidor because of this. But what have you found out by looking into Paul Goldschmidt a little more?
Yeah, you know, Goldschmidt is like my kryptonite because last year in my 10 bold predictions, I saw like decreasing contact rate. I saw like all these bad signs from the second half of 2016. So my prediction was that he was going to be outside the top 5 first baseman. And then he goes and has like an amazing season. And this year he's doing it. But like what I found, just like quick analysis of him, you know, his dribbler percentage is up 8%. So his really weak contact ground balls is up a lot. And actually ground ball issues have been an issue for him. Like he's obviously great, but he does have a fairly high ground ball percentage throughout his career for somebody who's a power hitter. So that's up. You know, he's hitting a few less line drives and hard drives. And so line drives are, you know, XStats used to do it. Andrew at XStats used to break it down by launch angle. So like 10 to 19 was line drive, 19 to 26 was hard drive. But he found looking at the data that, you know, actually like it doesn't fit that rigidly within the launch angles. So it's a combination of the launch angle and exit velocity. So line drives are like, line drives, and then hard drives are the best contact that you can make. Those are like lower fly balls that are hit really hard. And so both of those are down slightly, which can help explain, along with the dribbler percentage, why his batting average is down. His expected average is slightly above his current average, but it's still like 215, I think. And he's hitting more fly balls, but not of the good variety. So like ones that aren't getting out, and whether that's an impact of the humidor or not, I'm not sure. But his overall exit velocity on balls in play looks okay. It's actually up on line drives and hard drives. He's just not hitting as many. But it is down 4 miles per hour on his 5-ball percentage. The biggest issue for him is contact. It decreased significantly last year, but the quality of the batted ball kind of made up for it. But he's down to 71.1%. League average is like 76 to 77%. So he's well below average right now on contact percent. His contact percent over the last 20 games is 66%. He could turn this around for sure. I mean, we saw this from Edwin Encarnacion last year, but maybe there's an injury, maybe something's happening there. It's just his hard hit rate, has been going up recently, which is a good sign, but that contact rate has still been dropping, and he's actually chasing more pitches outside the zone, which makes me think that he's pressing. So just something to consider as like you think about, whether he's going to turn it around or not. I don't know whether that means he will or not, but over the last 20 games, things have been getting worse. So that's kind of a little bit of what I see looking at his profile.
No, and I like the breakdown there, because I'm not as big a fan of people saying it's the humidor with him. And a lot of your analysis there just pointed at so many other factors that humidor or no humidor, he was going to be in trouble. And there's a lot of other teams and players that have come in there and hit the ball just fine. So I know the overall numbers are down, so it's showing the humidor's effect. But when it comes to Paul Goldschmidt, I don't take that as much as an argument as, yes, he's swinging out of the zone more. His contact's different. He's hitting more balls into the ground without any, oomph. There's a lot of factors there besides just, they put a machine in a stadium to help limit the way the ball flies. So interesting to keep an eye on him. He did homer over the weekend in New York. See how his next homestand goes. Let's talk Paul DeJong. You kind of hit on him earlier. Many thought he couldn't continue what he did last year because of some peripheral stats, and he continued to do it this year. And you said you looked at him, and he was actually better than the stats kind of dictated in a roundabout way if you kind of look at him at a different angle. And now he's hurt, and he's going to be out for a while. Broken pinky. It's like the third or fourth broken pinky someone's had this year. It's ridiculous.
A lot of those high fastballs that are getting guys.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic for another show, because I'm very angry about that. And I've gotten a lot of people, which I really respect in the business or in the industry, that disagree with my thoughts on it. And it's hard to have a conversation on Twitter without many other people getting involved. So that's a topic for another day. But he's out for 6 to 8 weeks. We know he's going to be out. What kind of replacements are you possibly looking at there? Because it's different than replacing a guy, Robbie Cano. DeJong's great, or he's really good, but he can be somewhat replaceable.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really unfortunate about DeJong, because he was really starting to turn it on, and he's a guy who the rolling graphs are so helpful, because he's a guy where I wasn't big on him because I saw high K percentage, higher swinging strike rate. This is just a guy who has a bad approach at the plate. But if you look at his rolling average, his rolling 40-game average or 80-game average, he's a dude, he's constantly improving. He's always getting better. And you saw that happening this year. And it's really unfortunate. And it was a bizarre play. He got hit in the hand, and they initially called it a foul ball, and he didn't react. And then Matheny and then we're like, did that hit you? And he was like, yeah. And they ended up doing the review, and he ended up getting hit in the hand. And so it was just this bizarre play where it's like, man, you want to get on, because it was, I think, bottom of the 8th or something like that, and they were rallying. But anyways, for DeJong, the guys that I would be looking at, Shallow, one of the benefits of him is he had second base and shortstop eligibility. Mm-hmm. So you could be looking in a lot of different directions. So some Shallow replacements, so 12-team leagues. Surprisingly, Addison Russell is only owned, I think, in, I want to say 38% at 12-team leagues on Yahoo or something like that. So like he's a guy who, who I'd be looking at. He's actually, improved a lot of the skills, similar contact, a little bit more selective, hard hit rate's been going up. Brad Miller is another guy. He's a little tough in shallower leagues because he does get platooned against lefties, but he has been hitting the ball really well. He's got a great hard drive percentage. And so if you're looking for power, just realize like that, he may sit. Like he's playing against the Red Sox this week, and I think he's going up against 3 lefties. So earlier this week, he's not going to be a good play. Daniel Robertson from the Rays, with the injury to Hechavarria, he's going to be a shortstop every day. A great approach at the plate, gets on base a lot, gets you some runs. It's down the road a little bit, maybe a week or two. I'm not sure exactly. I haven't seen the timetable, but Dustin Pedroia is another guy who, if he's not on somebody's DL or if he's out there, in shallower leagues, maybe even deeper leagues. He's gone in all my 15-team leagues, but he's another guy who you might be looking at because De Jong's going to be out for a while. Deeper leagues, and actually, Nico Goodrum is a name that's been around in deeper leagues for a little while as somebody to kind of plug and play. But with Jeimer Calendario getting injured and being out for a little bit, he's getting everyday at bats. He's a guy who has speed. He's got power. He's got his approach is improving. O-swing percentage is improving. Contact rate is improving. Hard hit rate is improving a lot, and he's actually got a decent fly ball percentage. So if you're looking for a power speed guy, I might actually look to him. Tigers have a glorious schedule this week. I can't remember exactly who they're going against, the White Sox and somebody else who's atrocious. So they're like on the ESPN weekly forecaster, they have really high ratings. And then I'm also looking at Miguel Rojas, is another dude who, I don't necessarily believe it, but the approach is better. Hard hit rate is up. The approach is much better. Hit 2 home runs today, so maybe you can strike it while it's hot with him in some deeper leagues.
Yeah, Rojas is a guy that he went yard again today. For DFS players, he's always a target of value because he does have that upset like you're talking about. He's hitting good of late and has those big games from time to time. Nico Goodrum is definitely a guy on the radar. I put the bids in on him, I think, in every 12-plus deep league I have right now because injuries are galore, and he's middle infield eligible, outfield eligible. He's got eligibility everywhere. He's hitting in the middle of the order. He's got playing time, like you said. I don't mind rolling the dice while he's hot and then getting away if you have to, or maybe this is the thing that sticks. You never know. With the good thing about teams like the Tigers, they have nothing to lose by trying to play these guys, and they're going to probably make more trades in the season that he might still have playing time as we go. So I don't mind him at all.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about another guy that could be a replacement for him because he's back. He's on the same team. He's got middle infield eligibility, and he's played shortstop in the past. So you never know what Mike Matheny's going to end up doing there in St. Louis. But Jed Jericho, a guy that notoriously people talk about as he crushes left-handed pitching. Other than that, he's kind of whatever. But if you look at his numbers as a whole, he's been a very, very consistent player of late in the last few years. And there's really, playing time should be there. What is your thoughts on Jericho right now?
Yeah, Jericho, he's playing really well so far. When I looked at the skills, everything looks pretty similar. His O swing is about the same as past years, but his walk rate is up a lot, and that's actually his zone percentage. Like the percentage of pitches he's getting in the zone is down like 5%. So I'd anticipate that actually wouldn't stick. So if you're in an OBP league, don't necessarily think that that's going to stick around. But his contact's down a little bit, so you might expect the K rate to increase a little bit. But he's hitting a lot of line drives, a lot fewer pop-ups. I think his pop-ups are down significantly, which is like the worst batted ball you can have because it literally is never a hit. Not literally, but like 0.001.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. He's hitting. I looked this up yesterday, but he was hitting 292, and his expected average was 270, which is solid, right above average. He's getting a little bit lucky on home runs. I think 2.9 expected home runs, and he had 4 home runs, so tad bit lucky, but still well within the range. He's a guy I actually haven't checked this, but he seems like he always has a really strong first half and then falls off a little bit. So I think, if he's got shortstop eligibility in your league, I know there are some places he does and some places he doesn't. I'd say put him at the top of the list that I shared there because, in that lineup with the power, that you talked about, like, I think there's a lot worse options for him.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Let's talk about a couple youngsters that got the call recently, and we'll save the bigger name for last here. But let's start with Austin Meadows, a top prospect on the Pirate system for a couple years now. Never really got a shot. People couldn't figure out why. McCutcheon's finally out of town. Still didn't get the shot out of camp. He had a rough go of it to start the year in AAA, but the last few weeks really been turning it on. Many don't know if he's here to stay or not, which if you're the Pirates, why not, in my opinion, but that's a whole other story. Today went 3 for 4 with a homer, 2 ribbies. He stole a base last night, so he's 5 for 11 so far in his little quick stint up here. What are you doing with a guy like Austin Meadows? Because everything in the minor shows he should be a pretty good ball player. Strategy aside, what do you do with a guy like Meadows?
Yeah, I think he hit like 420 feet last night, which is a pretty good sign. A guy like Meadows, the challenge with him is you have Starling Marte, right? He's out with an oblique. I actually haven't seen what the timeline is, but I assume that when he comes back, there's going to be a limited amount of space with Gregory Polanco there and Corey Dickerson playing well. So he's a guy for me who, if I lost Marte or if I need a short-term solution in the outfield, I think he could do a lot worse. He's hit for average at virtually every stop in the minor leagues. Doesn't hit for as much power, but we've seen, the ball isn't as much of an issue this year from what I've seen and read. It doesn't seem like it's as juiced from everything that I read earlier on in the season. I don't know if that's still holding true, but a lot of guys have come with not a lot of pop, and whether it's an adjustment they've made at the major league level, the ballpark, whatever it is, they've hit for a little bit more power. So you could see it there. He also steals a decent amount. I think he already had 8 stolen bases in the minors this year. So, he's a guy who I think for me is a temporary solution, but certainly he has the skills to, like you said, to stick around potentially, but it's a crowded outfield. So I actually don't know if I believe what I just said.
No, and that's the biggest problem. It's a crowded outfield. He should be one of the 3 guys out there, but it's the Pirates make a lot of odds. Like they just sent Nick Kingham back down today. They'd rather have Joe Musgrove start on Friday. There's so many different scenarios there, and they've done it for a few years. The Pirates are one of those tilting teams. I think Meadows definitely worth an ad. I wouldn't go breaking the bank over him. If you get him for especially need of outfielder help, I think he's one of the top ones to go take a look at. So let's talk about the profession that many want to bid for today. And I've had a couple people ask me questions on how much would you go for him? And everywhere I talk to, I've seen anywhere from like 45 to 50% of your budget. And I've heard some people say 75 to 80%. I'm like, oh my goodness. Yes, the Nats are saying he's going to play pretty much every day, which is good. I'm assuming that means he's even staying up once, if ever, Adam Eaton comes back. I was off the Adam Eaton train before draft even started, but you never know how that goes. We're talking Juan Soto, of course, and this kid is a freak. Many were saying was the next year, assuming he'd be up next year, not this year. This kid's awesome. What are your thoughts on him, and what percentage would you put down since you're the TGFBI is already ran, so you don't have to hide anything anymore.
TGFBI, well, unfortunately, I put all my money in TGFBI on Brian Zimmerman and Joaquin Soria a couple weeks ago. So that's worked out well for me.
Hey, you never know.
You never know. I think everything you said is right on. I mean, this is a guy who started out the season in single A, still just 19, but he's
low A.
Yeah, like
low, not even high, low A.
Yeah, not even high A. He hit over 300 at each spot, 14 home runs and 192 plate appearances, I think, if my math is correct. One thing I recommend for folks who are listening who are on Twitter is, get on there and follow some of the guys who follow prospects, because there have been a lot of people who've been on him for a while. I don't follow the minor leagues as much as I probably should, and so I rely on a lot of those folks and their expertise to kind of take a look. But everything I've seen, I mean, the power is legit. If you just watch the swing, I don't know anything about mechanics, so don't listen to anything I'm about to say. But man, it looks smooth.
It's pretty. It's very pretty.
It looks really good. Yeah, it just looks nice. So He's a guy who, if I had a lot of my fab left, which I don't. I mean, my bid was like $101, I think, out of like the 230 I have left, something like that.
Yeah, I doubt that's going to go.
In some of my leagues, I have one league that I have about $830 left, and he'll be available next week. And so in that league, I don't know. I think he's special. I mean, he seems like a guy who's special. So I might look like 40 to 60% potentially. Only because and I think this is one of the challenges, right? He's a young guy, and I was like laughing earlier. I saw his first plate appearance and he struck out, and you could tell like he really wanted to do some damage when he was up there. And I was just thinking like, okay, what percentage does that drop his fab price now that he's like 0 for 1 with 1K? But everything I've read and seen, he is a difference maker, right? Like outside of Vlad Jr., like he is the hitting prospect. And we've seen like age is much less of an issue. Ronald Acuna's come up, and he's third in exit velocity on balls 0 to 42 degrees right now, right? So like guys can make a difference, and those are the guys that you need to take a chance on, because yes, there will be guys that fall there. Like in a shallower league, you may not need to put as much, but like in my 15-team leagues, like there are going to be very, very few instances where guys who have this much difference-making potential come on the wire. And so if you have some fab, like, use it. That's why it's here for guys like him. So long as that one thing is like the playing time, but he hits. Yep. Washington can't mess around.
No, they're gonna have to keep him. And Victor Robles, he's injured for a while. That's the only thing I could see stopping him. I just pulled up the TGFBI, and Juan Soto went for $365 out of $1,000 budget in my league. It's a little cheaper than I thought, honestly. The one that surprised me, looking at quick glances here, we're not going to talk about him today, but he's going to be on people's radars. Seranthony Dominguez, relief pitcher for Philadelphia, likely their closer. Okay, if I just told you Soto went for $360, want to take a guess on how much Seranthony went for?
Oh no! Don't tell me he went for like $400.
He went for $400.
Oh God! For one save. Wow.
Yeah, and I'm laughing because I remember back when people said the guys that spent over $100 on Hunter Strickland were crazy. Wow. So, oh man.
I mean, and the thing is, right, and this is the thing about it, is we can say that right now.
Yeah, exactly.
But he could go on and
be the best closer in baseball,
season, and then we look like we're foolish.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, that's the thing, is if you like a player, if you want that guy, you just got to
go
out there. It's a game, right? Like we want to have fun, and there's nothing more fun than like, I love this guy, I want him. You may think I'm crazy, and it ends up working out for you. So,
well, that's why I told some people on Soto. I said, hey, this guy's a special talent. If you want him on your team, break the bank. Just beware of these could be your obstacles. So, yeah, it'll be fun to see. Let's talk about a guy that I cut in my TGFBI team about 3 or 4 weeks ago because I don't believe in him. Maybe you do. I want to hear your thoughts on him. Let's talk some Matt Carpenter because
Matt Carpenter,
the tilting Matt Carpenter.
Oh man, I'm a sucker for Matt Carpenter. I think he's gonna take me. I actually don't. I own him in maybe like 8 leagues. I think one's no be too bad, but I'm a sucker for skills. So like a guy like Matt Carpenter who always has a really good the ball super hard. His batting ball profile is pretty nice. Balls, line drives, not a lot of ground balls. Contact is generally good. Like those are guys that I'm a sucker for. So I owned a lot of him. He was one of my bold predictions about how he was going to have 100 runs and 100 RBIs. Not looking so hot right now, but Matt Carpenter, the thing that I'll say about him is that he's not a 177 hitter. So some things that I've noticed recently, right, is like he has one of the largest differences between his average and expected average on X-Stats. So he's batting as of yesterday, I think, and his expected average is 251 through almost 80-point gap there between what he quote unquote should be batting and not. Now, there's been some really great research that's been done on the impact of the shift. He's being shifted, I think, over 80% of the time. And I have no doubt that is going to have an impact. But he's a guy who he has a 22.2% hard drive percentage, which the major league average is 11.5%, which is like the best contact you can make. And so there's got to be some lack of luck there. His pop-ups are down 8%. He was a guy who went too far in the launch angle revolution last year and was hitting the ball hard, but at too high of a launch angle to be a home run. So it's an easy out. He's hitting a lot of line drives, low fly balls. He's hitting the kind of contact you want. So I'm confident that he's going to get better. Will he get better to that 251 that his expected average is there? Probably not. But, the shift is going to have some impact. But since he took that 3-day rest in San Diego, he's hitting 350, very small sample size. But over his last 20 games, his contact rate is up at 80%. Last year was at 82%. It was as low as 66% this year at one point. And so he's starting to make a little bit more contact. The K rate should drop. He's getting on base. He's still going to get you runs. He's hitting at the top of the Cardinals lineup, which if it ever gets going is going to be a beast of a lineup. And so for me, like, he's a guy that I'm willing to take a chance on. But am I as confident as I was a couple weeks ago that he was going to turn it around and that he's a buy low? I'd say no, just because there's been that great research done on the shift, which isn't accounted for in X-Stats, which is something that's important to note.
Great point there. Yeah,
but
I like Carpenter.
Dropping him, Bubba. It's been
brutal. Rough. Been brutal. Like, I'm a big fan of him as a overall player, career, everything like that. But you can't play fantasy with your heart. So you can move on. Let's talk about a guy that went back to Anaheim this week and got a little revenge on his old ball club, and he's had a great season breaking out for the Rays. CJ Cron. I added him in a few leagues recently. I think this guy is pretty legit, but all projections, future projections show regression coming. What are you doing with a guy like CJ Cron?
Yeah, CJ Cron, he's a guy like in deeper leagues. I think you're really thank the FBI. So I've been really enjoying having him recently. He's a guy who, like if you look at the expected stats, they have him dropping his batting average. Everything looks pretty similar. Like the walk percentage is about the same. The K percentage is about the same. O swing is slightly better. He's swinging a little bit less than he has in the past, but his contact is up. And the thing that's important to note about his contact is that it's at 76.3% over the whole season, which is about league average. But in the last 20 games, it's close to 85%. And so that's where, the projection systems are probably going to be a little slow to respond for good reason, right? Like, we don't know if that's something that's going to be sustained, but he hasn't had a contact rate over a 20-game period that high since I think 2016, middle of the year then. And so that's where I think, the average may not fall as far as we think it is. And then from a home run perspective, I mean, the dude has always hit for power. I mean, last year he had 16 home runs in 373 plate appearances. So you're looking at 25 home runs over 600 plate appearances. Last year, it's higher this year. Expected home runs is a little bit, below that. So maybe that pace will slow down a little bit, but he's hitting the ball hard. He's hitting the ball in the air a decent amount. So, he's a guy that I like moving forward, and is somebody, that he may look like a sell high. And if you can get the right return, it's always about the return you can get. But I wouldn't expect as much regression from him, maybe as folks are expecting, because of that contact increase, which has also been coupled with a decrease in his outside the zone swing rate.
No, I like that. I've been a big fan of his, and he never got the playing time. So I loved the trade when he went to Tampa Bay, and he's taking full advantage of it right now. So really liking that. Let's talk about another guy that got traded this offseason to the Giants. He's playing the outfield. He's had a rocky season. Some say not what they were expecting. In reality, close to what he's been doing in the past. But Andrew McCutchen, what are you seeing with him that you like or dislike?
I put out a tweet earlier this week about McCutchen, and I just see a guy who's really getting locked in right now with everything that I see. So when I tweeted out earlier this week, his O swing percentage was at 14%. So I think I mentioned this earlier, but like half the league average. His hard hit rate was up at 50%, which is like 18 points above, 18% above league average. And his fly ball rate was above league average. It was like 43% over the same period of time. You look at his barrels per plate appearances is way up. It's at 7.4%, which is a very good number. You look at his hard hit fly ball rate, and it's close to 50%, which is a really good number. So I really see a guy who all the skills are saying that he is the guy. He is not only like the guy he's been, but the skills are better than they have been. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see him go on a little run. Obviously, like hitting in AT&T is tough. Like they're your team, about that. But I don't think that explains it. Like he has 3 home runs, I think 5.3 expected home runs at this point in time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's like one of those things where like if you keep it at that pace for a while and then you have that surge, your season and the narrative around it can change really quickly. So he's a guy I would actually be targeting, and he's especially like good because he's one of these guys that contributes in all 5 categories. Like he's not going to hurt you in average. He's going to get you runs. He's going to hit a decent amount of home runs. He's going to get you RBIs batting there in the lineup. And he steals bases. And so guys like that, like even when they're struggling, like they're going to contribute something to your team. And it makes it a lot easier to compensate for these like 10-day DL stints when you have a lot of guys that contribute like that on your team, because you're not relying on one guy for stolen bases. You're not relying on one guy for home runs. You're getting contributions from everywhere. And so those are the types of guys I love to have on my team. So he's a guy that I would buy low on right now.
Yeah, he was definitely for all.
You see him all the time. So,
yeah, for everything you just said, there's a reason I like to target him in my drafts. Just he's that consistency guy that you can, when you're taking shots elsewhere in your draft, you can get him. You say he's hitting around 250. You didn't expect him to hit 300. You expected, 260, 270, maybe 280. The power is there. It's going to zap a little bit, like you said, Nate. You see him certain games, he looks like the Kutch of old, and he's kind of getting in that groove, like you said, where you could see a good little run coming together. And as a team, the Giants picking it up of late, and obviously that's going to help him play better. So I don't hate it at all. I think he's a definite buy low target for someone that wants to give up on him. I'd snag him because at worst, he's going to give you a consistent player. You can plug in your lineup with all these injuries that are going on out there. I don't hate him at all. Let's talk about one last guy here. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just looked it up on Fangraphs because I had him last year in one of my main leagues. So check this out. In June and July last year, in June, he hit .411 with 6 home runs, 22 runs, 23 RBIs, more walks than Ks, a stolen base. In July, he hit .322 with 8 home runs, 22 runs, 19 RBIs, same amount of walks as Ks, 3 stolen bases. Like that's what you could be getting by picking this guy up. Like, I don't know whether that's a pattern throughout his career that he hits his stride kind of middle of the year, but I mean, there's not a lot of guys who over 2 months can put together that type of run in the league. I mean, I actually don't know if there's that many guys who can do it, but it doesn't seem like there's a ton of guys who can do that, who can contribute like that across the board. Like that's the potential we're talking about.
And it seems like just top of my head stuff. He does seem to be kind of that, summertime rest of season guy more often than not. It feels like. Last guy, Rich Hill, the blister. It happened again, and it's the couple of times already this year. This one cut open and started bleeding on him and keep it together. Well, what are you doing with a guy like Rich Hill? Because it's hard to just cut the guy, but my goodness, he wasn't that effective this year to begin with, and he keeps having injuries. Cutting might not be out of the question.
Oh, Rich Hill. I love Rich Hill. I just love Rich Hill. I had him last year. I had him towards the end of, 2016. He's a guy who, like when he's on, he is one of the best pitchers in baseball. And last year, it started out the same. Like he had the blister issue. He went on the DL, and then he came out and he was lights out. And so that's what I was hoping for. I think I have him in TGFBI, and I have him in, I think, like 2 other places. And normally when he's pitching, he's great. And I saw signs of it in his I can't remember who they were playing. But I actually saw signs of like some life. He was really struggling with his control, it seemed like. With the curveball, especially, that really sets up the fastball. But He's a tough one. I think in 15 teamers, you got to hold on to him because there's very few pitchers that, when they're healthy, can give you a 3 ERA with 11 Ks per 9 and a solid whip on a team like the Dodgers, who, yes, they've been terrible, but they have the potential to be very good. So I don't think you can drop him in 15 teamers. In 12 teamers, if you don't have a DL slot, it's definitely something that I would think about. I want to say they said that he would be out 10 days. Am I right? Or was it a couple weeks?
I think they're hoping for 10 days. Yeah, because they got to let the whole thing heal and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, you're probably looking like, I don't know,
a couple weeks easy
before he's actually pitching. So in a 12-teamer, you know, I'd think about it. It depends on what your options are, right? Like, the last thing you want to do is get rid of a guy like Rich Hill and replace him with somebody who's going to be a drag. So, you know, I'd really be looking at, you know, in 12-teamers, you can stream a decent amount, some like quality guys. So I'd think about it. But, you know, the thing that we always forget is, like, you know, and this happens all the time in draft season, is you have a guy who's injured like the first 2 weeks or month. And before the draft, you're just like, oh, I can't handle that month out. And now we're a month into the season. You're like, damn, I wish I'd had that dude on my team. So
yeah,
like, I would
exactly.
probably still hold on to him in 12s, especially if I have a DL slot. I think he's worth it just because of the upside. But if you have to, you know, if you can pick up, you know, guys that can replace those strikeouts and are going to give you decent ratios, then, you know, you have to at least consider it in 12s. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
That's one of the that's the tough one. Like, it really is. I think in 12 teams and below, you can do it, because I have like 2 12-team leagues and looking at the waiver wire today. There's a lot out there. Like, you really gain appreciation for the battling you do in those 15-team leagues when you look at those waiver wires. Like, wow, okay, I can pick up, you know, Andrew Heaney on a week like this, where does not a flashy name, but he comes in real handy on a week like this where he's nowhere to be found on a 15-team league, so on and so forth. But Rich Hill likely would get swooped up pretty quick. You'd have to. It's more of, are you desperate? Do you need to fill that spot? And if can you hang on to him? Do you have a DL spot? So on and so forth. But just keep an eye on him, because I'm just worried these things are going to keep lingering, because this has happened a couple times this year. He has a track record. It is a little scary, but you said it. When he is healthy, when he is pitching, he's very good. So it's just tilting. A lot of it, you know, don't drink and do fantasy sports. Don't do a lot of like when you're angry. Take a deep breath and step away from the computer.
Totally.
But
the point you made there is so good, though, about like it all being dependent on the team context. Like, I think that point in fantasy baseball is missed so much. Like, you oftentimes get questions, should I pick up this guy? Should I pick up that guy? I'm like happy to answer those questions, but like so much of it depends on team context. Like, yeah, do you have guys who can fill in the Ks that you were expecting from Rich Hill, right? Do you, you know, like the ratios, like who's available on the waiver wire? What's the replacement value you're looking at? Like, we oftentimes think about a player in isolation of the team, but like the team is even more important than, well, I don't know if it's more important than that player, but like, you know, like it's so important to understand your team context and what you need, right? Like especially in Roto, like if, you know, like it's great to go for a high stolen bases guy because stolen bases are important, but you know, if you're already leading the league in stolen bases and you're getting it from a lot of places and you're not planning on trading stolen bases, like it may not be the most important thing for you to do, right? So that, I think you nailed it right there, like about how important the team context is for making these types of decisions.
It is, like you said, people ask you point blank questions, trades, pickups. And I always tell them, well, what size is your league? Who are you replacing so-and-so with? Like, there's a million other factors than just, you know, A and B that make these work. That's why I dropped Matt Carpenter in TGFBI maybe a few weeks before others would, where, you know, every show you listen to or read, it's like, okay, he's still going to bounce back. Everything points to him bouncing back. And my team was going to make moves, and the guy on the waiver wire was going to help me right now. We're for another month, which he's about to right now. It would have buried me. So it's one of those things. Can you do it? What do you got? Because I have no bench space or nothing right now. It's pretty crappy. But team context.
Reserve spots in TGFBI makes it really hard. Like
to hold on to guys. It's tricky.
To have 7, and there's
Yep.
it's my DL is full. I've got like Elvis Andrews, Avisail Garcia, Rich Hill, Carlos Martinez. Like they're just it's piling up, but you only got those 5 reserves. Got to use them wisely.
That's what I'm worried about is my DL's full like yours. And pretty soon, some of those guys are going to start coming off, and then you got to realize, who am I dropping? Like it changes. As we're in leagues with vultures, and they're going to just jump on that. Because when I dropped Carpenter the next week, he were $100 in fab. There were believers out there that were like, "Okay, you still got it." I was like, "Oh, please don't backfire on me. Please don't back." But you never know.
Yeah.
But all right, man.
Carpenter is the Ryan Zimmerman for me, where like I threw $313 of fab on him. Everybody was like, I can't believe he was on the wire. And like, I was like, I couldn't believe it either. This is going to be great. And then it's like, he plays 3 out of the next 7 games and then goes on the DL. And I'm sitting there like, oh well.
I mean, Zimmerman, once he's healthy, if he gets healthy, I believe in him a lot. I believe.
Yeah.
Better. But all right, man, that'll wrap it up today. This was an absolute blast. Everybody, go check him out on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. If you aren't already, you're missing out on the fantasy game. BatFlipCrazy.com. So go check all that out. And one thing I'm really looking forward to, our junior gets called up. His O swing rates and everything you're going to break down are going to be outstanding because he hits just like his father. So he's going to break all the stat models to begin with. So that'll be a blast.
I picked him up in TGFBI. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm subtweeting everything the Blue Jays do just so that maybe that'll be effective in getting them to call him up. But I really appreciate it, Bubba. Hey, you having me on. Like, it's been a lot of fun. Really appreciate the conversations we have on Twitter. You're a great follow. I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit. And I apologize afterwards for talking so much.
And I'm all good with it because it was great content, and we'll do it again for sure. And on the Vladdy front, I saw about an hour ago the Blue Jays sent Urania down to the minors and said a corresponding move will be made soon for Tuesday's game. So you'd have to hope that's going in one direction.
I think it was Smada.
Yes.
Who puts out like the TGFBI standings. Mm-hmm. He was saying that the steamer projections for Vladdy Jr. Are like there's like 7 better rest of season hitters in Major League Baseball based on steamer projections in him. I'm like, that's my hope in TGFBI. It's a super competitive league.
He's in the Trout category.
Oh yeah,
it's crazy.
For sure. I'm excited about that. So yeah, that's cool. We'll see.
Yes, we will. All right, everybody. This was Bench with Bubba, episode 95 in the books. Again, go follow him on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy, and we'll catch you guys next time.